Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the Climate Jobs and Just Transition Summit. This is our first session today, Labor Leading on Climate, and this has been really a lot about the work that we've done at Climate Jobs New York, both combating climate change and trying to reverse inequality through the creation of good jobs. Today, we're fortunate to have a distinguished group of labor leaders. They're colleagues of mine, and I've been privileged to work with them over the years, and we're going to be hearing from them in just a moment. But just a couple of quick housekeeping items that we should go through for today's forum. Throughout this session, if anybody has a question that they would like to submit, we're going to be using a format that will work this way. We'll be taking your questions from the audience during the discussion, and if you'd like to submit one to our panelists, please follow the instructions on your screen to join the question and answer with your mobile device. I tried it, and I can tell you it's pretty easy to use. You can either scan the QR code that appears, or if it's easier, just go to slido.com on your phone and type in climate jobs. And those details will be displayed periodically throughout the panel discussion that we're going to have. So now, not in any particular order, I wanted to introduce the panelists that you will be hearing from today to just give us a little bit of information about who they are and the work that we're doing, and then we'll get right into the questions. So it's great to see everybody. It's great to have you on today. And why don't we just start with Nikki Budzinski. Nikki, who's the strategic advisor over at the Climate Jobs National Resource Center. Nikki, it's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you as always, Vinny. And I just want to thank you and the Climate Jobs National Resource Center for putting this exciting summit together. And to all the panelists, it's great to be with you guys. Today, actually, it's a really exciting day to be a part of this summit to talk about Illinois in particular and the work that Illinois is doing that is in conjunction with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center. Just last week, we launched Climate Jobs Illinois, which we're really proud to get off the ground. The work that we're doing in Illinois, we've built an executive committee of 9 different unions, a growing coalition of labor support that represents not just the building trades, but across the board support within the labor movement from members of SCIU Local 1 and the UAW Region 4. And we're really excited about the work that we have to do together to move forward an agenda like what we've been talking about today that both addresses the climate crisis, but also income inequality. And as a coalition, we're very excited to also be doing work with this particular focus on communities that have been left behind, both by the COVID crisis, but also the climate crisis. So our coalition is really excited about the work we have to do together. Just a little bit more about Illinois. Illinois' energy portfolio, our base load still includes a lot of coal, a lot of natural gas, obviously, and then our nuclear fleet is critically important. Our nuclear fleet is to our transition to 100% clean energy economy. But I would also just say that in Illinois, only 7% of our energy portfolio is made up of renewable energy. So as a coalition, we feel like we have a lot of work to do to grow that percentage and increase the amount of renewable energy that as a state we're relying on, but also to not just grow and create new jobs, to make sure that those jobs of the future are union jobs. And so our coalition over this next few months and the work that we're doing is to put out some policy proposals that really address just that, both in the energy sector, looking at how do we include labor standards in some of the energy development work that's going to be happening in Illinois moving forward, looking at public transportation and how we support public transit as a really important tool to reducing carbon emissions in the state of Illinois. And I'm sure this is applicable to a lot of us all across the country, is this COVID crisis has put public transit in a real moment of crisis. And so what can we do as a coalition to support working men and women that actually power and engine the public transit system in Illinois, but we make sure that it's a financially solvent system as well. We're looking at building recommendations and building out energy efficiency proposals. And then, of course, just transition. which is critically important because in Illinois, where we do have coal-fired power plants, one of our leading companies, Vistra, has announced already they're closing half of their fleet in the next few years. So as a coalition made up of working men and women, what are we doing to support those workers? And so we're really excited in Illinois to be launching this coalition. And Vinny, really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this summit and talk a little bit about the work we're starting in the Midwest. And we want to grow it. It begins in Illinois, but we're looking forward to expanding it out to states like Wisconsin and Michigan and continue the work ahead, really doing the two-prong approach, which is addressing the climate crisis, but also income inequality.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Nikki. We have partners certainly throughout the globe that we've been working with, and joining us today is Sharan Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Sharan, it's great to have you with us this morning.
It's great to see you again, Vinny. I wish it was in New York, but hey. So first of all, let me say Labor leading on climate. It's fantastic to see this seminar and your leadership and that of Climate Jobs New York in action, because this is about hope and trust for workers. But our work is on two fronts. One is actually pushing the momentum and the investment in industry sectors that will get us to net zero, and particularly where there are jobs, and jobs, because for us, every sector has to transition. Of course, that means that there's a lot of pain too. We will not leave workers behind. It's Just Transition has been a union campaign for now almost 15 years, and it continues. And that means that we need to see older workers looked after with secure pensions. We need to see younger workers with hope for jobs, income support, skilling, redeployment, whatever it takes. And we need to see communities reinvested in. Like many of you in America, I've walked the coal fields and it's painful. And now we're taking on the fossil fuel industries where they won't actually submit to transition and just transition, and that's painful. But unlike coal, our fossil fuels companies can make the shift. They can use their offshore platforms to build wind, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But, you know, your investment in wind, offshore wind, bringing partnerships from around the world like the Danish pension funds into this, negotiating with the AFL and with UND, the labour councils and the unions specifically around union jobs. This is what it's all about. So great work, Vinny. And I've heard a rumour that Climate Jobs New York's going to invest in a partnership with Labor nationally. I say hooray. And we're in there for the partnership action. We'll talk more about specific industries later.
Well, we look forward to having that discussion as well. With us also, we as we've said and talked about often, there's a need to have partners in this coalition to do this work. And with us is the Lisa Dix, the New York Senior Rep to the Sierra Club. Lisa, it's good to see you again.
Great to be here. Thank you. And good to see you too, Vinny. And I'm really honored to be with such a great group of folks to have this discussion today. So my name is Lisa Dix, and I'm the Senior New York Campaign Representative for the Sierra Club, Beyond Coal Campaign. The Sierra Club is the largest and oldest grassroots environmental organization in the nation. We have over 3.2 million members and supporters nationwide, and where I work, particularly in New York, we have over 80,000 members and supporters. The Beyond Coal Campaign's mission is to decarbonize the electric sector nationally, rooted in a just and equitable transition. And I lead all of the electric sector campaigns for the Sierra Club here in New York. So back in 2013, my campaigns really focused on phasing out coal in New York and rapidly setting the groundwork to scale renewable energy. And what we realized really quickly on as we started moving away from coal and really campaigning to phase out coal here in New York's electric sector is that it's really complicated. It's complicated because there are workers in this plant, in each of the plants. There are communities that are reliant on the tax base of the plants. And so just to say that we're going to, move the economy to a clean economy, there's a lot of things that need to get considered, and there's a lot of people that are going to be impacted. And at the same time that we were working on campaigns to phase out coal, we were also really ramping up renewable energy campaigns to rapidly scale sun, wind, offshore wind here in New York. And it occurred to myself, my campaign team, was that we have an amazing golden opportunity here, that as we get further commitments, we have the strongest commitments and mandates in the nation in New York to decarbonize across the economy, that the golden opportunity is now to build this economy in the right way. Build it in a way that is going to uplift workers and communities, that's going to pay family wage supporting jobs and careers, that we're going to have the opportunity to attract supply chain and manufacturing. And so this opportunity really put our campaigns in action and really starting to reach out to the labor movement here in New York. We started off with our offshore wind campaign, where we worked with the Long Island Federation of Labor and the Long Island Building and Construction Trades. We built partnerships through, the leadership of Roger Clayman. And we started working with business managers from, the iron workers to the IBEW to the painters. And then we started expanding that work, working with the New York City trades and AFL-CIO to the larger state AFL-CIO and the building and construction trades. And we built an amazing partnership and have won some really concrete goals in our fight to make the clean energy economy an economy that works for the New York workforce. And so I'm really excited here to talk today about some of these amazing wins that we have worked through together, and just what an amazing journey we still have ahead of us to build a clean energy economy that's going to really uplift New York's workforce and our communities.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Within the AFL-CIO, I have really been fortunate to work with great leaders throughout the country, and joining us today is the president of the Texas AFL-CIO, my good friend Rick Levy, who is doing just that. So Rick, good morning and great to see you.
Thank you, Vinny, and thank you for having us. This is a kind of a mind-bending experience to be part of this seminar and all this thinking that's going around that's really shifting the paradigm of how we look at the issue of jobs and the environment. I really appreciated Secretary Treasurer Schuler laying out the opportunities that existed in that kind of framework, because in Texas, it's really difficult. I think we've become clear now that climate change is real. I don't think anybody can legitimately deny that our lives are affected, that our children's lives are affected, that our planet is affected. But, in addition to the general threat of climate change, it presents a particular threat for our unions in Texas. When you think of Texas, when a lot of people think of Texas, they think of oil rigs and they think of, energy. And so our movement, not just our economy, but our movement is fairly heavily based in industries that are been dependent and really central in the whole fossil fuel industry. And so our jobs are on the line, our livelihoods are on the line, our schools are on the line, our economy's on the line. And so in Texas, we start to see this all changing around us. And so the question is, do we just try to hold on to what is? Or do we try to play a role to really shape what this future is going to look like and make it in a way that actually benefits our members and benefits our communities? And so that's the struggle that we engage in. That's the conversation that I hope we can have some of today. In Texas, there's great opportunity right now. We've been working for a long time, and the politics in Texas are changing. We're playing a role in changing that politics. There's going to be great new opportunities for labor to be at the table of dramatic policy change, both on the state level and the local level, where frankly, places like Harris County, where Houston is larger than 24 states. And if we can make changes there, we can affect a lot of lives and we can affect a lot of things. So really glad to be part of this conversation to identify policies and approaches where we're not only doing things that are good for the climate and good for the environment, but that are good for the workforce. So look forward to the discussion. And Vinny, thank you for your leadership and thank you for having us.
It's great to have Texas as part of this agenda as well. Lastly, we've said we've worked with a lot of different partners and allies, not only here in the country, but also throughout the globe. But on our contractor side, we have some really good partners that we've worked with over the years. And one of them is with us today, the Executive Director of the New York Electrical Contractors Association, Edwin Lopez. Edwin, it's good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Vinny, and good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to participate in this panel discussion. As I was giving some thought to this whole conversation and the contractor's perspective, the contractors obviously are not a political organization, but here in New York City, and specifically with Local 3, the Contractors Association have a 100-year plus relationship with the labor movement and Local 3. And although we're not political, our interests with the labor movement are very much aligned. We're excited to participate. I think one interesting thing, and I'll make a statement, I think about this often, is that the business community, specifically electrical contractors, struggle with this whole conversation, or struggled in the past with this whole conversation about green technology and work opportunity, because there wasn't enough meat on the bone for the businesses to sink their teeth into it. And the truth is that it's coming from, we've been talking about this for a long time, and then in a very short period of time, it seems to be ramping up very quickly. We're excited to participate in it. In working with the labor movement, just recently, 2 weeks ago, the building trades under the leadership of Gary LaBarber and Chris Erickson signed a PLA, specifically including solar, which was a challenge because it actually talked about in order to make that happen, they're going to have to change the prevailing rate, which is going to take a little bit of work, as well as the whole concept of community participation. So the good news is that for everybody on the call is that that seems to have been worked out, although the work still has to be done. But so there is an ongoing work being done to change the prevailing rate so that we can lower the cost of construction, specifically relative to solar. And then, and of course, then on the state level, changing the prevailing rate. And that happens by virtue of changing the collective bargaining agreement. So the contractors, and we've had about 3 different seminars talking about solar opportunity, and the contractors are excited about it. We're talking about wind, solar, battery storage, microgrids, anything renewable. We're excited for the opportunity, and I'm glad to participate in the call and look forward to, the growing opportunities that the whole question of renewables brings to the business community, as well as, despite the fact that I said earlier, we're not a political organization, we care about the community, and the fact that we've been able to work that out is tremendous. So everybody wins, and looking forward to participate.
Well, thanks so much, Edwin. So as we go into some questions over the next 20 or 25 minutes or so, I think we framed it out, and I know our presenters and our speakers earlier before our panel framed it out well. We have this dual crisis. We're combating both climate change, pursuing the creation of good jobs, and how the labor movement has a unique and important role in that. We really do. We've tried to hit on this often certainly in New York City with the resources and our history of fighting for a lot of different social justice issues, and which this is certainly a major one. But the resources that we could bring to the table in that fight are very important. So, Nikki, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your help and assistance that you're providing and helping try to organize some of the the resources of the labor movement now through the National Climate Jobs Resources Center, but also just generally about some of the resources of the labor movement and how they could play a pivotal role at helping, with the creation of good family-sustaining union jobs as we combat climate change.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny. Our greatest resource as a labor movement is our members. I mean, mobilizing our members, getting them engaged in policy and proposals that support working families, that support addressing the climate crisis. I think that is, just to start with, I think the top among them resources that we can really offer in this work. But beyond that, I think as a part of mobilizing those members, labor does have a lot of important resources. Obviously, financially, we do have some resources, but it's really the staff and what we found within building the coalition in Illinois, the communication support, the research support, the policy support. Many of the labor unions that we work with have full-time folks that are dedicated to just building out different policy proposals, obviously, that support working men and women. And so it's been very rewarding to start this process of really working individually with unions and those teams that they have as to how do we leverage that capacity to help us address some thoughtful policy proposals that address the climate crisis. And so we've been working hard at that. I would just say, as someone that maybe uniquely wears kind of two hats, I work with Vinny at the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, and then also I'm helping to lead this work in the Midwest with Climate Jobs Illinois. Climate Jobs National Resource Center is a tremendous resource, and they've been incredibly helpful and invaluable in providing expertise to individual states that are interested in building out these coalitions. One of the best things that I think we've been able to do is to learn from other states. Climate Jobs Illinois is really modeled after the great work that you've heard about in Climate Jobs New York, which started this whole movement. And so what we've learned is, some of the best practices, some of the challenges that Climate Jobs New York faced when they were building their coalition, their labor coalition, from those individual unions and from those leaders that founded it, and how do we work with that and learn from that in Illinois? And I think that's one of the other greatest resources that this work really brings together. Is I get to talk to President Levy about what he's doing and the great work he's doing in Texas to build out his coalition, and share with him the ideas of what we did in Illinois. And I'm learning from Vinny as to what happened in New York. So I think, first and foremost, it's our members. Second, there are a lot of important resources that labor unions do have just structurally from an infrastructure perspective that can be brought to bear in building out coalitions in states. And then it is just a sharing of ideas with labor, and also with important partners like Lisa and the Sierra Club, and how do we work with stakeholders outside of the labor movement to leverage all of our capacity to address the climate crisis.
That's great. I know we've talked about how the industries that are going to be created, the infrastructure that is needed to have a role in a clean energy economy, creating good union jobs, is going to be unique, really, from region to region throughout the country. So that's really important. I'm not sure if anybody else had anything wanted to add on that, or any of these questions as we go through. Feel free to do so. Sharan, did you want to say something? You're on mute right now, Sharan.
I just wanted to say that what you asked the question, what does labor bring to the table? It brings trust. Working people trust the unions. You just had that recent survey that showed you overwhelmingly that. But you bring more than that as well. You bring advocacy and capacity to mobilize. And if I told you, I work with the New Climate Economy, and they, with the WRI, just put out a report called America's New Climate Economy, and it shows that for an investment package of $320 billion per year in clean energy, you're going to have to spend that and more. and indeed agricultural programs, you could create 4 million jobs per year for 10 years. If you had 250 billion every year for upgrading infrastructure, again, we're going to have to do that and more, you could create an additional 4.6 million jobs every year for 10 years. We can mobilise around those demands. And, you know, Rick and Vinny, you sit in cities that are critical to this because we are very focused on cities, not because we're abandoning the rural areas. On the contrary, if you think about the momentum for creating jobs, for building mass transit, for construction, etc. in cities, then you create the demand and supply in and out of the cities with all those millions and millions of people, billions around the world that actually prop up our rural or in some sometimes across border communities. So doing that mapping, getting people together with that hope of good jobs into the future, that's what unions bring, and that's magic.
That's right. And we have a history and a culture of engagement and activism that we've used often. We're using it right now throughout our country as we close out the 2020 census. So it's very important, I know, that we employ those resources, deploy those resources in this fight as well. Okay. Lisa, you wanted to jump in real quick?
Yeah, really quick. I just, as somebody who is an ally of the labor movement, what I think that labor brings to the table is that, one, labor is incredibly politically savvy and politically engaged, and has long-term relationships with decision leaders from the local level, which so many energy decisions are being made all the way up to the state level, with the legislature, with the governor's office. And you all know how to move an agenda, you know how and have the people power to be able to mobilize behind it. And the last thing that has been super critical and important is that as we're building this clean energy economy, we've got to create these new rules and structures. Like if we want PLAs, if we want, fair labor standards in all of this, if we want to be able to attract major components of the supply chain or manufacturing and really make sure that, from my experience, New York is set up to make that happen so that we're not only getting those family supporting jobs, but we're building careers and we're building the supply chain and manufacturing. Labor is, you have the expertise to be able to advise your allies about how that gets built, how that gets done, what data needs to be provided so that we can really have all of the ideas and facts on our side to mobilize around. So those are my additions.
No, we appreciate that. But one of the things which we also bring to the table, Edwin, if you could just speak to briefly, is the infrastructure that we have. Labor movement, it's been said often, and I've heard it, that we have the largest training infrastructure in the United States after the military. How can this infrastructure, as a person who represents contractors, how can this infrastructure be used to create good paying jobs in a climate-based economy? Well,
by virtue of the existing apprenticeship programs that that exist here in the city of New York and obviously throughout the country, we're staged to have probably the best infrastructure necessary for training. And that goes to the point that I made earlier relative to community participation, because to have people participate and not give them the training is a mistake. And we've got, there's no other organization that rivals our ability to do the training necessary, as well as the graduation rate being very high for the purposes of, the graduation rate being very high for the purposes of those jobs that come, start out as apprenticeship training jobs and then become careers. And it's just very exciting to look at another sector of work opportunity for the contractors, as well as for the training that already exists, that give us the ability to take on this responsibility and, be successful at it, so that, people are not just trained, but they develop a level of skill necessary to do great installations, which, turn into jobs that are on budget and on time, and, built correctly. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much with that. Well, obviously there are a lot of different types of unions and organizations out there, and many times we see them, they have their various interests trying to find their way through these complex issues and spaces. So Rick, how do you navigate through a myriad of these perspectives? I know Texas is a large state. I'm sure you have a lot of these interests that you have to deal with there often, and you've done it well over the years. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say very carefully. So no, it's actually been one of the most exciting things that we've actually done here, in my opinion, in Texas. And it started, I mentioned at the beginning how heavily dependent we are on fossil fuel industries in Texas and how much of our movement comes from that. And so historically, I think when issues like this have come up, we haven't gotten engaged because I think we've seen many of the environmental initiatives that don't include the interest of labor. And I think people have kind of been defensive about those. So that's historically been where we've been at. In January, we had our COPE convention, which for folks who don't know is our political convention where we decide who we're going to endorse. And we had amazing, spirited discussions around two congressional candidates in particular who were more pro-labor than you could find anywhere else in the state. Mike Siegel being one and Jessica Cisneros being the other. And the battle that we had over their endorsements was because they were also supportive of Green New Deal type legislation. And so we had this intense conversation that ended up with those candidates being endorsed, but also with certain unions feeling very alienated from the process because they felt like we were trying to, that they couldn't believe that the AFL-CIO was actually trying to get rid of their jobs, is the way they saw it. And so we decided at that point that what we were going to do, we were going to have a proactive conversation. And we were not going to just wait for candidates to show up and split us over their agenda, but we were going to develop our own agenda. And so, it's kind of like, to me, it's real solidarity. And what that, sometimes solidarity is showing up at a picket line for somebody, but sometimes solidarity is sitting down and being willing to have a difficult conversation and figuring out what we have in common. What does the janitor in a low-income community have in common with somebody who works at a nuclear power plant? And what can we come up with together that moves our entire movement forward? And so those are the conversations we're having. And I'll tell you that we have our task force that ranges the entire gamut of our movement. And every single one of them has committed to being part of this process and coming up with something together that we can all agree on. And I think that's a really exciting thing moving forward. And as we change the state politically, and we are in a position to actually leverage our members' interest when it comes to climate change, I think we're going to see more and more interest. And, with the issue of just transition, I think that's the hardest one, because when people hear just transition here, they think of a fancy funeral. We've seen coal plants shut down in rural communities and nothing coming back. We've seen, and that affects the schools, that affects the workers, that affects everybody. And so our challenge is to put our needs and the needs of those workers who have powered our state and powered our country, actually, at the very forefront of what's happening as we move forward. So that's what we're trying to do.
That's terrific.
But, Rick's right about that, Vinny, because, the pain of that, they've been fantastic unionists. They've built our country. It's ridden on the back of energy. And I can tell you, I've really all my life admired those unions in the coal sector because they've been community. Everything about them was community as well as jobs. And, Liz talked about it earlier, but we owe it to them to make sure that as we transition in energy, just like we did in telecommunications, just like we've done in many areas of technology and construction and other things, that the energy industry are indeed good union jobs, and that our kids see that industry fueling those communities, whether it's directly with renewable energy or whether it's in fact with the investment in other sectors. But I can tell you it's the same in steel or in aluminium or cement. We often talk about the blue-collar jobs in coal and other fossil fuels, and that they're really important. We can't leave them behind. But I can tell you the pain of trying to get people to understand that if we don't have clean steel, that means clean energy, and new areas of energy like hydrogen and so on will make the difference with intense heat. Same with cement, same with coal. And then we have to look at circular production. And there are companies where unions are at the table doing this around the world. The other thing, Vinny, is we have the leverage. We have $40 trillion of workers' capital invested in the global economy. Now, if we're not making the demands on our pension funds to fund good union jobs based on fundamental labour rights, on compliance, on the kind of contracts that you do every day, then we're not serious about what I said earlier. What does Labor bring to the table? But the critical thing, Rick's right, you have to be at the table.
That's right.
And co-design, co-monitoring, co-management in many areas where it comes to good union jobs is fundamental. And we have to shift the thinking around many of the American employers around those questions. So, it's not just in the US, by the way. This is a global phenomenon, and we're in there for the fight in every sector.
Absolutely. Those are great comments. I often say that this is a whole economy, a clean energy economy that we're looking to have a presence in, to make sure that, yes, we are addressing climate change, but that we are doing it in a way which is going to harness and make sure that we take advantage of the economic opportunities that are there, and then make sure that those economic opportunities actually result in good jobs with family sustaining wages, union jobs, safe jobs. And it really is, sometimes it's overwhelming when you think about the possibilities that can really, that we could leverage. Okay, we're going to go to some questions. Jeff, are you out there? I know we have some questions, and then we could weave in some additional topics as well in these last 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny. We do have a number of questions. I'll just start with one that I appreciate, and maybe a question for Lisa. I hope to hear more about the victories of labor in the Sierra Club in New York State. Could you talk a bit more about what those have been?
I can. There's New York, just to frame up the answer really quickly so I don't take too much time, because I have a lot of really good things to say. The New York State has the toughest and most stringent mandates on new climate targets in the nation. So, for example, 100% of New York's electric sector needs to be decarbonized by 2040, with 70% by 2030. So that is a lot of clean energy to build. And in addition, there's the other sectors that we're looking at. So, for example, there's the heating sector, there's the transportation sector, there's the industry sector that Sharan talked about. And so within all these sectors, there are massive decarbonization goals and really long, really stringent targets to get there. And we're going to have to electrify a lot of the other emissions from the other sectors. So I just wanted to kind of frame up, like what the actual project is and what the opportunity is. So we have been working with Labor, the Sierra Club, since 2013 on renewable energy, large-scale renewable energy, sun, wind, and offshore wind. And when we started partnering on how we're going to get the scale that we have to get built to get to that 100% target, which is an enormous scale. how are we going to do this right? And how are we going to be able to build this economy together? And so there was a lot of listening, both sides, about what is needed, both in the interim and the long term, to build this economy right. So in the interim, we've made a lot of really great progress in securing prevailing wage for the building of all large-scale renewable energy projects. We have made progress together in terms of requirements for project labor agreements, in particular for offshore wind and building offshore wind. We've run campaigns together, and we're still working at it, and we still got some more to do to get a port here in New York. And the reason why a port, an offshore wind port, an assembly port is going to be so critical is because that is going to create the long-term careers that are necessary. And it's also because New York would be a first mover, it's going to be able to attract the supply chain and all other kinds of jobs and economic investments here in New York. And so those are some of the just high level. The last thing is that we've also been able to leverage a lot of workforce training funding to really make sure that the unions are working with their rank and file and through their apprenticeship programs to do the training that is necessary so that we are up and running and ready to go to put union labor into all the jobs that we are going to have in building renewable energy to scale for New York's clean energy economy and to get to that 100% target.
That's great, Lisa. And I know there's always so much more work to be done for sure. Jeff, do you have another question for us?
Sure. And Rick touched on this. I think a number of panelists did a bit, and we have a panel focused on this later in the day, but it's an important one. So I'm going to throw it out there. How do we get from here to there, good jobs to good jobs?
Well, that is the key. Well, you're all thinking, I would say that really is the key here. We have to make progress on these two issues. You know, it's not just enough to make progress on climate change. We need to make sure that we are creating good jobs in the process. But there is tremendous, tremendous opportunity, as I've said. So who wants to jump in with it?
I could just jump in really quickly. I think, Jeff, one of the key parts to all of this is education, in the sense that we need to be educating our members on what these new jobs mean, what the potential is that they hold, the opportunities. But it's not just with our members and our leaders, it's also with elected officials, because they are on the front line of building this new economy. And it's really important that while we do talk about the creation of new jobs, what type of jobs those are is critically important if we're ever going to really fully address income inequality. So I would say an important component to this question is a robust education for across the board with stakeholders, labor, and elected officials.
That's great. Thanks, Nikki. Sharan and Rick, I think both have come. So Sharan, why don't you, because this is an important...
Well, Vinny, you're right. And I suspect Rick's going to go there too. It's jobs and jobs and jobs. No question. And it's climate-friendly jobs. Because if they're not climate-friendly, we're actually not going to be in a stable environment to hand on good jobs to our kids. You know, we started the campaign with there are no jobs on a dead planet, simply a fact. Now we have to actually build jobs on a living planet. Before COVID-19, we already had a crisis of convergence that was inequality, income, race, gender. Now then we have the climate imperative, and that's about survival of the human race. So Rick's right, this is an imperative we can't dodge. We can see it with our own eyes. But in fact, we now have COVID-19. You've lost more jobs than were missing in the Great Depression. But globally, can I tell you, it's almost 500 million jobs already in the formal sector, and 1.6 billion of our brothers and sisters in the informal sector, largely in developing countries, but even in the new platform businesses, face destitution every day. No income, no survival. So for us, it's all about the mobilisation to get the money not into austerity, not for workers to pay and their families, but into the stimulus that will get those jobs that I talked about before. We've got a struggle of the generations on our hands. Education's absolutely part of it. If you're going to build hope and use the trust we have, we've got to bring everybody along with us. But it takes leaders like you. So I'm delighted to be amongst you.
And I'm going to go to Rick, one of those leaders who.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And I would just add two things. We're at a tipping point right now. We're at a point where we're going to either go in the direction of, as we create this new economy, which is being created, is it going to be a low wage, low road economy? Exactly. Or is it going to be a high wage, high road economy? And Nikki was exactly right. We have to educate our members. That's number one. Number two, we have to understand that it's going to take, like what y'all did in New York, Lisa, with the environmental community fully committing to the goals of the labor movement when it comes to the future economy. That, the problem in Texas, frankly, is that we have a lot of solar energy, we have a lot of wind energy, and it's all non-union. And so, or it's not all, but it's predominantly non-union. So when we turn to our members and say, hey, join the new economy, it's like, where? So we have to organize, we have to grow politically, we have to make sure our coalitions are really formed around both of our shared interests. And people need to understand that if labor can't be part of shaping what this new environment is going to look like, it's going to be bad for everybody.
Thanks. Hey, Edwin.
Yeah, so I think the opportunity to leverage the success that we expect to have here in the city of New York, and I'm sure, and I'm not aware of it, but there are other major cities across the country that are in conversations about PLAs relative to climate jobs, is a great opportunity to really speak about what this means. I think we're not just talking about green jobs and climate jobs. We're talking about changing people's lives and bringing a sector of the economy into the conversation for the purposes of their bettering their lives and having, being skilled, having good pensions, good paying jobs, so that they can make a contribution to the world of work and have a future. This is about career jobs. And I think when we talk about the apprenticeship, there's nothing greater. Right. And I'm a product of the apprenticeship training program. The success that comes along with apprenticeship training, because once again, it's about a career, and to really talk about that and to encourage that kind of energy to happen across the country could do nothing but exponentially grow this conversation.
Thanks so much, Edwin. Hey, Jeff Okrad, who's our executive director, of course, from Climate Jobs New York. Do you have one last question that we can give them, maybe that they can give a quick response if anybody wants to add to it there? I'm not sure you're looking at the queue.
I am, and this is, it's a big question, but an important one, hard to deal with in a couple minutes. But how is labor working to strengthen diversity in unions?
To strengthen diversity in unions. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, let me just say that in the city of New York, the building trades, we have this conversation all the time. There seems to be a big disconnect between the labor movement and the elected officials as to the question of increasing the diversity. And I would say that the percentage of people of color in the building trades is 50% and growing all the time. Despite the facts that the participation of people of color in the city of New York is large and continuing to grow, there seems to still be a disconnect because we're not good at promoting ourselves. We're not good at telling people what we do good. And that's probably one thing that we need to do some work at, so that the electeds who are growing, certainly in the city of New York, are people of color and have a disconnect. Everybody wants their kids to go to college, and they forget about, the value of apprenticeship training and the fact that, an electrician working 7 hours a day can make, close to $100,000 a year in wages alone, not to mention the benefits. And I think that we need to, work on that, because I think that would increase the support that we get from the electeds for the purposes of, coming to an agreement on these project labor agreements.
And I could just add just really quickly on that too, and appreciate all that Edwin's added. In Illinois, this is a top priority for us, and we're trying to find ways, especially in this new renewable economy, how do we continue to strengthen our community relationships as we're talking about this new renewable economy that's coming online? How is labor building stronger relationships with community? How are we incentivizing in the state apprenticeship readiness programs so that we are creating even more pipelines from the community then into apprenticeship programs in the state? And then lastly is really working with our contractors and making sure that, we are making sure that we're partnering with our contractors in a way that together we are incentivizing the diversity of the workers that were being trained and are being utilized in this work. So I think it's really threefold. And in Illinois, we're working hard to try to come up with some ideas and proposals as to how to address that.
Well, that's terrific. Jeff, do you have any other questions? I know we're winding it down here. I don't want to go, but I think, why don't we do this? Why don't we go to some last minute thoughts that I know maybe some folks have, just real quick, if you could, because I think we are getting close to time right now. So if we can, maybe just give us some closing thoughts we'll call it a lightning round in 30 seconds or so that you can give us on some of your thoughts. Sharan, we'll start with you.
Well, I was going to say, I think the challenge of diversity is largely in elected leadership, and people want to see, themselves reflected, their views reflected. So Labor is, again, in a critical position for walking the talk. We can hold others to account when we hold ourselves to account. And it's the same about climate. We can hold others to account for a future that is indeed sustainable if we hold ourselves to account for the advocacy, the mobilisation, the education, all of the things you've heard today. So I just say Labor leading on climate, Vinny, where we started, is so important to a decent future for everybody.
Rick, you want to jump in? What are your thoughts?
I just appreciate being part of the conversation, Vinny. I think, when you stop and you just center yourself in this conversation, you realize the stakes that exist right now, and how we have to figure this out, because the future of our movement depends on it. The future of our planet depends on it. And so look forward to continuing to work with everybody here to birth a new economy that has workers at the center of it.
That's great. And Lisa, any thoughts?
Thank you. I just want to say thanks for inviting me, and it's wonderful to participate on this panel. And I just want to close by saying that Labor really does have a lot to bring to the table in making sure that we not only have and achieve bold climate action, but that we're centering equity and justice and good paying jobs and an economy that works for all in all of our climate action. And we have an amazing opportunity to build this together. We've got to decarbonize America. What could be it's a massive project, and it's going to take a lot of action and just gusto and fortitude in all working together so that we can build this right. Because if we're at a crossroads, if we don't build this right, just like Rick said, we can have low wage jobs. We can continue to, exacerbate inequality, or we can achieve bold climate action and achieve clean energy for all, uplifting our communities and all of our workforce in the process. So thank you. And I'm really excited to keep going with you all.
We appreciate it. Edwin or Nikki, any just last minute quick thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I just wanted to thank you for your invitation and allowing me to participate in this very important conversation. I think, as was stated a number of times, the labor movement has the benefit of the infrastructure that exists through the apprenticeship training. And I think that if we work at, leveraging the PLAs that allow the community to participate in a way that they've never participated in the past, will increase the participation, or should I say the support of the electeds. And I think also, and I know that this conversation is void of the participation of electeds, but if they were sitting here on this conversation, on this panel, or listening, I think the education that they would get as to our intent and our purpose for what it is that we're talking about, which absolutely speaks to the people that they represent, their constituents, and their future, I think that they would be supportive.
And Nikki?
I would just briefly say, a thank you to inviting me to be a part of this and to the panelists in this conversation, and to say there's a real fierce urgency to now of addressing both climate crisis and then also income inequality. We can do it together, and looking forward to that work in the Midwest.
Well, I would just close by thanking all of you. This panel was labor leading on climate, and I think we all could feel both excited and also challenged with the opportunities that are in front of us, and really the necessity that we have. In so many ways, you framed it out. We have infrastructure that certainly the labor movement wants to put into action to make sure that we are both combating climate change and creating good family-sustaining union jobs wherever possible. And making progress. So it is great working with all of you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all in the weeks and months and years ahead on this issue. And thank you, of course, to Jeff Fokrat and everybody at Climate Jobs New York for helping, and Climate Jobs National Resource Center for putting on this forum today.
Thank you, Vinny.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great.